The dark clouds gathered on the horizon as 18-year-old Catherine Nichols stared out the window of her family's modest farmhouse, the weight of her father's death certificate still heavy in her trembling hands. The bank would come for their land tomorrow. The drought had killed their crops, the debts had mounted, and now, with no man to work the farm, the vultures were circling. "I don't understand why you must go to him," her mother said, voice cracking as she folded Catherine's dresses into a worn leather trunk. "Your cousin Sarah would take you in. There are other ways, Kathy." Catherine turned from the window, watching her mother's weathered hands smooth the fabric of her Sunday dress. 6 months after her father's passing, Margaret Nichols looked 20 years older, grief etching deep lines around her eyes and mouth. "We've been through this, Mama." Cousin Sarah barely feeds her own children, and Mr. Thornton's letter was clear he needs a housekeeper and the pay is more than fair. Catherine tried to keep her voice steady. "It's only in Silverstone. It's not like I'm going to California. Silverstone is 3 days' ride from here." "And you don't know this man. Your father would never have allowed it." Her mother's hands stilled on the trunk. "Pa isn't here anymore," Catherine said softly, "and we've no choice. This is the only way I can send money back to keep you in the house." She crossed the room and took her mother's hands. "Mr. Thornton is Judge Wilkins' nephew. He vouched for his character." Margaret Nichols' eyes filled with tears. "Judge Wilkins hasn't seen his nephew in 15 years. Characters change, especially out west." "Silverstone is hardly out west, Mama. It's just beyond the mountains." "It's cowboy country, Catherine. Rough men, saloons, and lawlessness." Catherine smiled despite herself. "Now you sound like one of those penny novels Aunt Judith loves." "I sound like a mother who's about to lose her only child." The smile faded from Catherine's face. "You're not losing me. I'll write every week, I promise, and as soon as I've saved enough, I'll send for you." Outside, the distant rumble of wagon wheels announced the arrival of Samuel Porter, the mail carrier who had agreed to take Catherine as far as Rivercross, where she would catch the stagecoach to Silverstone. "That'll be Mr. Porter," Catherine said. Her throat tightened as she gazed around the small room where she had slept her entire life. The patchwork quilt her grandmother had made, the small wooden horse her father had carved for her 8th birthday, the faded daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. Her mother followed her gaze. "Take the quilt at least. The nights get cold in the mountains." "I couldn't. You'll need it this winter." "I have your father's old coat. I'll make do." Her mother folded the quilt and placed it atop the dresses. "There, now you'll have a piece of home with you." A knock sounded at the door and both women startled. Catherine closed the trunk with shaking hands, securing the brass latches. "Miss Catherine." "Mrs. Nichols, it's Samuel Porter. We should get started if we want to make it to Rivercross by nightfall." Margaret Nichols straightened her shoulders and wiped at her eyes with her apron. "Coming, Mr. Porter." She turned to her daughter. "Let me look at you one last time." Catherine stood tall, though her heart was breaking. At 18, she had never been more than 10 miles from home, had never spent a night away from her mother's protective presence. Now she was embarking on a journey to a town she'd only heard of, to work for a man she'd never met. Mr. Porter appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. "I'm sorry to rush you, but there's a storm brewing. Best we get going." Catherine nodded, then embraced her mother fiercely. "I love you, Mama. I'll make you proud." "You already have," her mother whispered against her hair. "Be safe, be smart, trust your instincts." "If anything feels wrong, I'll come straight home," Catherine finished. "I promise." Together, they walked out to the waiting wagon. Mr. Porter loaded Catherine's trunk while she stood with her mother on the porch steps, both trying to memorize the other's face. "I've packed some apple tarts for the journey," her mother said, pressing a cloth-wrapped bundle into Catherine's hands. "And there's a few coins sewn into the hem of your blue dress, just in case." "Thank you, Mama." "All set, Miss Catherine," Mr. Porter called. Catherine took a deep breath, then kissed her mother's cheek one final time before walking to the wagon. Mr. Porter helped her up onto the wooden seat, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As the wagon pulled away, Catherine looked back. Her mother stood on the porch, one hand raised in farewell, the other pressed against her mouth. Even from a distance, Catherine could see the tears streaming down her face. The sight was too much to bear. Her own eyes filled and she turned away, shoulders shaking as she gave in to the sobs she had been holding back for days. The journey to Rivercross passed in a blur of unfamiliar landscapes and uncomfortable silence. Mr. Porter, a kind but taciturn man, respected her grief and left her to her thoughts. By the time they reached the stage-coach station, Catherine had cried herself dry. The stage-coach to Silverstone was scheduled to depart at dawn. Catherine spent the night in the station's small boarding room, listening to the rain patter against the window and wondering what awaited her in Silverstone. The stage-coach journey was arduous. Catherine shared the cramped space with a traveling salesman, an elderly couple returning from visiting their daughter, and a stern-faced woman in black who never spoke. For 2 days, they jolted along mountain roads, stopping only to change horses and take hasty meals at way stations. By the time they crested the final mountain pass on the 3rd day, Catherine was sore, exhausted, and terrified. Below them sprawled Silverstone, a sprawling town nestled in a valley where the mountains met the plains. "First time in Silverstone, miss?" The salesman asked, noticing her wide-eyed gaze. Catherine nodded, taking in the distant shapes of buildings, the ribbon of river cutting through the valley, and the vast expanses of rangeland stretching toward the horizon. "It's a good town," the salesman said. "Started as a mining settlement 20 years ago, but it's cattle country now, some of the biggest spreads in the territory." "Is it safe?" Catherine asked hesitantly. The salesman chuckled. "Safe as anywhere, I suppose. Got a proper sheriff now, and most of the real troublemakers moved on when the silver played out. Still gets lively on Saturday nights, though." This did little to reassure Catherine, but she forced a smile and returned to watching the town grow larger as they descended the winding mountain road. The stage-coach pulled into Silverstone just before sunset. Catherine stepped down onto the dusty main street, legs unsteady after days of travel. While the driver unloaded her trunk, she took in her surroundings. The town was larger than she had expected. A wide main street lined with wooden buildings, some quite grand with false fronts and painted signs. She counted 2 saloons, a hotel, a bank, various shops, and at the far end, a white steepled church. "Miss Nichols," she turned to find a boy of about 14 watching her expectantly. "Yes." "I'm Ethan from the livery. Mr. Thornton sent me to fetch you. He apologizes that he couldn't come himself. There was trouble at the north pasture." The boy gestured to a small wagon nearby. "I'll take your trunk." Catherine's stomach knotted with anxiety. "How far is Mr. Thornton's house?" "About 3 miles outside town. The double T-Tikes, the second largest spread in the valley." Ethan hoisted her trunk into the wagon with surprising strength for his age. "You'll like it there. Mr. Thornton's fair and the house is real nice." Catherine climbed onto the wagon seat beside Ethan, clutching her reticule tightly. As they left the bustle of town behind, she watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Despite her exhaustion and anxiety, she couldn't help but be struck by the wild beauty of the landscape. "There it is," Ethan said after about 20 minutes, pointing ahead. "Double T." Catherine followed his gesture and saw a large 2-story house set back from the road, surrounded by cottonwood trees. A wide porch wrapped around the front, and golden lamplight spilled from several windows. Behind the house stood a large barn, a bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. The entire property was encircled by a split-rail fence with an arched gateway bearing a metal brand. 2 T-Tikes intertwined. As they approached the gate, a tall figure on horseback emerged from the trees. Even in the fading light, Catherine could make out broad shoulders, a Stetson pulled low, and the easy way the rider sat his mount. The horse, a magnificent chestnut, moved with fluid grace as its rider guided it alongside their wagon. "Ethan," the man called, his voice deep and resonant. "I see you found our guest." "Yes, sir, Mr. Thornton. Picked her up right when the stage arrived, just like you said." The man, Mr. Thornton, turned his attention to Catherine, and she felt the weight of his scrutiny even though she couldn't make out his features clearly in the gathering darkness. "Miss Nichols," he said, tipping his hat. Welcome to the Double T. I apologize for not meeting you in town myself. We had some trouble with rustlers. It's quite all right, Mr. Thornton, Catherine replied, striving to keep her voice steady. Thank you for sending Ethan. He nodded, then turned his horse toward the house. Follow me in, Ethan. Mrs. Gunderson has supper waiting, and I'm sure Miss Nichols is hungry after her journey. As they passed through the gateway, Catherine got her first clear look at her new employer as he rode ahead of them. Tall and broad-shouldered, as she had first noted, with dark hair visible beneath his hat. He rode with the easy confidence of a man who had spent his life on horseback. There was something compelling about him, an air of quiet authority that matched the vast landscape around them. The wagon pulled up in front of the house, and Mr. Thornton dismounted in one fluid motion, handing his reins to a ranch hand who appeared from the shadows. He turned to help Catherine down from the wagon, and she finally saw his face clearly in the lamplight spilling from the house. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps in his late 20s. His features were strikingly handsome, with a strong jaw, straight nose, and eyes the color of the summer sky. A few days' worth of stubble darkened his cheeks, and a thin scar ran along his jawline. He looked every inch the cowboy, from his worn Stetson to his dusty boots. "Miss Nichols," he said, extending a hand to help her down. "Mr. Thornton," she replied, placing her gloved hand in his. Despite the leather between them, she felt the strength and warmth of his grip as he steadied her descent. "Tyler," he said. "Tyler Xavier Thornton, but everyone calls me Ty." A slight smile softened his features. "Welcome to your new home." Catherine stepped onto the ground, suddenly acutely aware of her wrinkled traveling dress and wind-tangled hair. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton. Tyler," she corrected herself. "I appreciate the opportunity." He studied her face for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You've been crying," he observed quietly. Heat rushed to Catherine's cheeks. "It was a dusty journey," she said, looking away. Tyler didn't challenge her obvious lie. "Come inside. Mrs. Gunderson has prepared your room and a hot meal. Tomorrow's soon enough to discuss your duties." He turned to Ethan. "Bring Miss Nichols's trunk to the blue room." The interior of the house was as impressive as its exterior. Polished wood floors, a grand staircase, and furnishings that spoke of taste and means. Catherine followed Tyler through a spacious entry hall into a dining room where a plump, gray-haired woman was setting out dishes on a large oak table. "Mrs. Gunderson, this is Miss Nichols," Tyler said. "She's had a long journey. Perhaps some hot tea while I show her to her room, Mrs." Gunderson smiled warmly. "Of course. Welcome, Miss Nichols. I've turned down your bed and left fresh water for washing. Dinner will be ready in half an hour, just a simple stew tonight, I'm afraid. We weren't sure exactly when you'd arrive." "That sounds wonderful, thank you," Catherine said, finding comfort in the older woman's motherly demeanor. Tyler led her upstairs to a corner bedroom with windows facing east and south. "The blue room," she realized, noting the robin's egg blue walls and matching counterpane on the four-poster bed. A small writing desk stood beneath one window, a washstand with a porcelain basin beneath the other. Ethan had already deposited her trunk at the foot of the bed. "I hope this will be comfortable," Tyler said, remaining in the doorway. "The washroom is at the end of the hall. This house has indoor plumbing, my mother's insistence when my father built it. Hot water for bathing requires advance notice to heat the boiler, but there's always cold running water." Catherine couldn't conceal her surprise. Indoor plumbing was a luxury she hadn't expected. "It's lovely, thank you." Tyler seemed to hesitate, then said, "I'll leave you to freshen up. Dinner in half an hour. After that, we can discuss the particulars of your position." He turned to go, then paused. "Miss Nichols?" "Yes, I know this must be difficult for you, leaving your home, your mother. Judge Wilkins mentioned your circumstances." His blue eyes held genuine compassion. "I want you to know that you're safe here. And if there's anything you need, you have only to ask." The unexpected kindness nearly undid her composure. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded once, then left, closing the door quietly behind him. Alone at last, Catherine sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the events of the past few days. She thought of her mother, alone in their little farmhouse. She thought of the miles between them, of the unknown future stretching before her. And for the first time since leaving home, she allowed herself to acknowledge her fear. What had she gotten herself into? Later, washed and changed into her best everyday dress, Catherine made her way downstairs. She found Tyler in what appeared to be a study, standing before a large map pinned to the wall. He turned at her entrance. "Miss Nichols, you look refreshed." "Thank you. The accommodations are more than I expected." He gestured for her to sit in one of two leather chairs positioned before a large oak desk. "I understand from Judge Wilkins that you're familiar with keeping household accounts." "Yes, I managed my father's ledgers after my mother's hands grew too painful with arthritis." Catherine sat, smoothing her skirt. "I'm also experienced with cooking, cleaning, mending, and general household management." Tyler sat in the chair beside hers rather than behind the desk, an informal gesture that surprised her. "Good, Mrs. Gunderson handles the cooking and some cleaning, but she's getting on in years. I've been looking for someone to take over the household management and serve as my secretary of sorts. I have business correspondence that needs tending, and the ranch accounts need organizing." "I'm confident I can handle those duties," Catherine said. "Your room and board are covered, of course, in addition to the monthly salary we agreed upon in correspondence." He studied her face. "Is something troubling you, Miss Nichols?" Catherine hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "I'm merely curious why someone of your means would hire an inexperienced girl from a small farming community when you could likely find someone with professional qualifications in Silverstone." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Perceptive. The truth is, I've tried hiring locally. The last 3 women were more interested in becoming Mrs. Thornton than in doing the job." Catherine felt her cheeks warm. "I see. Judge Wilkins spoke highly of your character and abilities, and he mentioned your situation that you need to send money to your mother." Tyler's expression grew serious. "I respect that kind of dedication to family. It tells me you're likely to take your responsibilities seriously." "I will," Catherine assured him. "My mother's welfare depends on it." Tyler nodded. "Then I believe we'll get along well. Mrs. Gunderson will show you the routines tomorrow. For now, let's have dinner. You must be famished." Dinner was indeed a simple but hearty beef stew with fresh baked bread. To Catherine's surprise, Tyler insisted she join him at the table rather than eating separately. "This isn't a formal household, Miss Nichols," he explained. "I was raised to believe that breaking bread together builds trust." As they ate, he asked about her journey and her home, showing genuine interest in her answers. Catherine found herself relaxing despite her initial nervousness. There was something reassuringly straightforward about Tyler Thornton, a quality she hadn't expected in her new employer. After dinner, Mrs. Gunderson brought coffee, then excused herself for the evening, leaving Catherine and Tyler alone. "Tell me about your family," Catherine said, surprising herself with her boldness. If Tyler was startled by the personal question, he didn't show it. "My father built this ranch from nothing. Started with 10 acres and 50 head of cattle he won in a poker game, or so the story goes. By the time he died 10 years ago, the Double T covered 10,000 acres. My mother passed 2 years later." A shadow crossed his face. "I have a younger brother, James, who's currently at university back east." "I'm sorry about your parents," Catherine said softly. Tyler inclined his head in acknowledgement. "And yours? Judge Wilkins mentioned your father's passing, but little else." Catherine stared into her coffee cup. "My father was a farmer, not a very successful one, I'm afraid. The drought these past 2 years." She trailed off. "He worked himself to death trying to save the farm. After he was gone, the debts mounted. The bank is foreclosing." "And your mother?" "She's staying in the house for now. The bank manager allowed that much, at least until winter." Catherine looked up, meeting Tyler's gaze directly. "That's why I need this position to work out, Mr. Thornton. I need to earn enough to help her keep a roof over her head." Tyler held her gaze steadily. "I understand, and I give you my word that as long as you fulfill your duties, your position here is secure." Something in his tone, a deep sincerity, eased a fraction of the anxiety Catherine had carried since leaving home. "Thank you." Tyler set down his cup. It's been a long day for you. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be busy enough. As Catherine prepared for bed that night, she stood at her window gazing out at the moonlit landscape. The mountains loomed dark against the star-filled sky, and the vast open range stretched endlessly before her. This wild, beautiful country was her home now, at least for the foreseeable future. And Tyler Thornton was now her employer, a man she would need to please if she hoped to help her mother. He seemed kind, fair, and honest qualities she hadn't dared hope for when she'd agreed to come here. But Catherine had learned early in life that appearances could be deceiving, and men's characters often revealed themselves only with time. She would reserve judgment on Tyler Thornton. And in the meantime, she would work harder than she ever had to prove her worth. In the weeks that followed, Catherine settled into her new role at the Double T. Each morning, she rose before dawn to organize the day's tasks. She learned the rhythms of the ranch, the needs of its owner, and the quirks of its staff. Mrs. Gunderson proved to be a patient teacher, showing Catherine the systems she had developed over her 15 years managing the Thornton household. Tyler himself was often away from the house, riding out with his men to check cattle, mend fences, or handle the countless other tasks required to run a successful ranch. But he always returned for dinner, and these evening meals became a time Catherine found herself looking forward to more than she cared to admit. Despite his wealth and position, Tyler was unpretentious. He spoke to his ranch hands with the same respect he showed to the banker in town. He listened more than he talked, but when he did speak, his words carried weight. And he never failed to ask Catherine about her day, showing genuine interest in her work and well-being. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Catherine was in the study organizing Tyler's correspondence when he returned earlier than expected. His boots were muddy, his clothes dusty, and there was a grim set to his jaw that immediately put her on alert. "Is everything all right?" she asked, setting aside the letters she had been sorting. Tyler removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "There's been more trouble with rustlers. They hit the Henderson place last night, took nearly 30 head. He hung his hat on the rack by the door. Ben Henderson's boy was hurt trying to stop them. How badly? Broken arm, some bruises, could have been worse. Tyler's expression darkened. Doc says he'll mend, but Ben's out for blood. Can't say I blame him. Catherine set down her pen. Do they know who's responsible? Sheriff suspects it's the same gang that's been hitting ranches all across the territory. They're organized, well-armed. Tyler crossed to his desk, noticing the neatly stacked papers. You've been busy. I've sorted your correspondence by urgency. The ones requiring immediate attention are on top. Catherine stood. Would you like coffee? You look tired. A smile softened his features. That obvious, is it? Only to someone who's been watching, Catherine replied, then felt heat rise to her cheeks at the admission. I mean, I know what you mean, Miss Nichols. His smile widened slightly. And yes, coffee would be welcome. Join me. This had become their routine coffee in the study while they discussed ranch business, but today something felt different. Perhaps it was the way Tyler looked at her, as if seeing her anew. Or perhaps it was the growing awareness in her own heart that her feelings for her employer were becoming dangerously complicated. Actually, Tyler said as she turned to go, I was thinking we might have our coffee on the porch. It's a fine evening and I've been cooped up in the saddle all day. Catherine nodded. I'll bring it out. When she returned with the coffee tray, Tyler had shed his dusty jacket and was leaning against the porch railing, gazing out at the mountains. The setting sun cast a golden glow across the landscape, turning his profile to bronze. It's beautiful here, Catherine said, setting the tray on the small table between two rocking chairs. I never imagined such vastness. Tyler turned, accepting the cup she offered. Do you miss your home? Every day, she admitted, taking the seat he gestured to. But not as much as I did at first. This place has a way of getting under your skin, that it does. Tyler sipped his coffee, studying her over the rim of his cup. You've adjusted well. Mrs. Gunderson sings your praises. Catherine smiled, pleased by the compliment. She's been very kind, everyone has. And your mother, have you had word? I received a letter yesterday. She's well, though lonely. The money I've sent has helped her settle some of the smaller debts. Tyler nodded thoughtfully. Good, that's good. He hesitated, then added, I'm increasing your wages, by the way. You've taken on more responsibility than we initially discussed, and you've done so without complaint. Catherine's eyes widened. That's not necessary, it is. I pay fair wages for good work, Miss Nichols. You've more than earned it. The genuine respect in his voice warmed her more than the praise itself. Thank you. They fell into comfortable silence, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. Catherine found herself sneaking glances at Tyler's profile, noting the strong line of his jaw, the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes that appeared when he smiled. In the month she'd known him, she had come to admire not just his appearance, but the man himself, his integrity, his quiet strength, his fairness. Such thoughts were dangerous. He was her employer, a wealthy rancher with prospects far beyond a penniless farmer's daughter. And she was here for one purpose only, to earn money for her mother. Romance had no place in her plans. A penny for your thoughts, Tyler said, breaking into her reverie. Catherine started, embarrassed to be caught staring. I was just thinking about how different everything is here. The land, the people, the way of life. Different good or different bad, different, expansive, she decided. As if there's more room to breathe, to be who you truly are. Tyler's expression grew thoughtful. That's why I love it here. The vastness puts things in perspective. He set down his cup. Speaking of perspective, there's a social at the church this Saturday. Would you like to attend? It might do you good to meet more people from town. The invitation surprised her. I wouldn't want to neglect my duties. Your duties can wait for one evening, Tyler said. Besides, I was planning to attend myself. We could go together. Catherine's pulse quickened. Together? Tyler must have sensed her confusion. As employer and employee, of course, Mrs. Gunderson usually accompanies me to these functions, but her rheumatism is bothering her again. Of course, Catherine said, ignoring the twist of disappointment in her stomach. In that case, I'd be happy to attend. The social proved to be an enlightening experience. Catherine met many of Silverstone's residents and discovered that Tyler Thornton was held in high esteem by most of the community. Women of all ages flocked to his side, and Catherine couldn't help noticing the speculative glances cast her way as she stood near him. Don't mind them, a friendly voice said behind her as she helped herself to punch. They're just sizing up the competition. Catherine turned to find a young woman about her own age smiling at her. I'm sorry, I'm Daisy Miller. My father owns the mercantile. The blonde extended her hand. And you must be Miss Nichols, the mysterious new housekeeper at the Double T. Catherine shook her hand. Hardly mysterious. Oh, but you are. The most eligible bachelor in the territory hires a pretty young woman who's never been seen in town, and suddenly he's attending socials he usually avoids. Daisy's eyes twinkled. It's the most exciting gossip we've had since Sheriff Wilson caught Mayor Palmer swimming in the horse trough last summer. Catherine felt her cheeks grow warm. Mr. Thornton is my employer, nothing more, MMHMM. Daisy didn't look convinced. Well, employer or not, you should know you're the envy of half the women here. Tyler Thornton is quite a catch. Before Catherine could respond, Tyler himself appeared at her side. Miss Nichols, I see you've met Daisy. He smiled at the blonde. Gossiping about me already, Daisy. Someone has to maintain your reputation, Tyler, Daisy replied with a grin. I was just telling Miss Nichols what an ogre you are to work for, Tyler chuckled. And I'm sure she believed every word. He turned to Catherine. I've promised Mrs. Wilkins a dance, but I'll return shortly. Unless you'd prefer to continue hearing about my many flaws from Daisy, I think I've heard enough to reconsider my employment, Catherine replied, surprising herself with the teasing response. Tyler's eyes crinkled at the corners. Too late. You're stuck with me now. He gave a small bow and departed for the dance floor. Daisy watched him go, then turned back to Catherine. Not interested in him, Catherine sipped her punch to avoid answering. The evening continued pleasantly enough, though Catherine declined all offers to dance, preferring to observe from the sidelines. She watched Tyler dance with several women, noting his easy grace and the way his partners invariably smiled up at him, clearly charmed. As promised, he returned to her side between dances, introducing her to various townspeople and ensuring she wasn't left alone for long. His attentiveness did not go unnoticed, and Catherine became increasingly aware of the speculative glances coming their way. It was nearly midnight when they finally left the social. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, the silence broken only by the rhythmic clip-clop of the horses' hooves and the occasional creak of the buggy. "Did you enjoy yourself?" Tyler asked as they passed through the double T-Tikes gate. "I did," Catherine admitted. "Everyone was very welcoming." "Good. I was worried it might be overwhelming. Small towns can be curious about newcomers," Catherine suggested. Tyler laughed. "That's a diplomatic way of putting it." "I noticed you're quite popular with the ladies of Silverstone," Catherine said before she could stop herself. In the moonlight, she caught the flash of his grin. "Jealous, Miss Nichols?" "Merely an observation, Mr. Thornton," she replied primly. His laughter warmed the night air. "If it makes you feel better, I danced out of obligation, not pleasure." "I'm sure Miss Henderson would be devastated to hear that. She seemed quite taken with you." "Amanda Henderson has been quite taken with the double T since she was 16, Tyler said dryly. "Her father's been trying to arrange a match for years." Catherine's curiosity got the better of her. "And you're not interested?" Tyler was quiet for a moment. "Let's just say I'm looking for something more than a convenient business arrangement in a wife." The conversation shifted to safer topics as they approached the house, but Catherine found herself mulling over Tyler's words long after she'd retired to her room. Despite her best intentions, she was becoming attached to him not just as an employer, but as a man. A man who had shown her kindness, respect, and a warmth that made her feel valued in a way she never had before. Such feelings were foolish, she knew. Even if Tyler shared them, which she had no reason to believe he did, she wasn't in a position to act on them. Her mother's welfare depended on her keeping this job and sending home her wages. A romantic entanglement with her employer could jeopardize everything. The following weeks brought a flurry of activity to the Double T. Autumn was approaching, and with it came preparations for the cattle drive to the railhead at Fort Collins. Tyler was often absent from dawn until well after dusk, returning exhausted but satisfied with the progress. Catherine found herself missing their evening conversations, but she understood the demands of the season. She focused on her duties, took over more of Mrs. Gunderson's responsibilities as the older woman's arthritis worsened, and wrote faithfully to her mother each week. One evening in late September, Catherine was in the kitchen helping Mrs. Gunderson prepare preserves when a commotion outside drew their attention. Running to the window, they saw several riders approaching at speed. One man slumped over his saddle. "Something's wrong, Mrs. Gunderson said, wiping her hands on her apron. "That's Tyler's horse in the lead, but he's not riding straight." Alarm shot through Catherine. She rushed outside, reaching the yard just as the riders pulled up. One of the ranch hands, a man named Charlie, was supporting Tyler, who had a makeshift bandage wrapped around his left shoulder, dark with blood. "What happened?" Catherine demanded, hurrying to Tyler's side. "Rustlers," Charlie said grimly, "caught him in the act up in the north pasture. They got the drop on us." Tyler grimaced as Charlie helped him down from his horse. "I'm fine," he insisted, though his face was pale beneath his tan. "Just a graze." "That's more than a graze," Catherine said, noting the amount of blood on his shirt. "Get him inside, Mrs. Gunderson. We need hot water and bandages." The older woman was already hurrying back to the house. "I'll send Ethan for the doctor." Tyler shook his head. "No need to bother Doc Wilson. It's not that serious." "I'll be the judge of that," Catherine said firmly, taking his right arm to help steady him. "Charlie, his other side, please." Between them, they managed to get Tyler into the house and settled in his study. Catherine quickly cleared the desk and, with Charlie's help, got Tyler seated upon it. "Now," she said, addressing the ranch hands who had crowded into the room, "I need space to work. Charlie, stay, the rest of you out, and someone bring me my sewing basket from the parlor." Tyler raised an eyebrow despite his obvious pain. "Since when do you give orders on my ranch, Miss Nichols?" "Since you got yourself shot," she retorted, carefully removing his bloody jacket. "Now hold still." To her relief, the wound was indeed not as serious as she had feared. The bullet had torn through the flesh of his upper arm, missing bone and major blood vessels. It needed cleaning and stitching, but with proper care, it would heal without complication. "You're fortunate," she told him as she cleaned the wound with whiskey from his desk drawer, making him hiss through his teeth. "A few inches to the right and we'd be having a very different conversation." "Didn't know you had medical training," Tyler said, watching her work with a mixture of pain and admiration. "My mother taught me. On a farm, you learn to handle emergencies." Catherine threaded a needle with catgut. "This will hurt." Tyler nodded, bracing himself. He didn't flinch as she began to stitch, though beads of sweat formed on his forehead. "The rustlers got away," he said through gritted teeth, apparently preferring to focus on something other than the needle piercing his skin. "But we identified at least one of them. A man called Reeves who's been hanging around town lately. Save the report for the sheriff," Catherine advised, tying off a stitch. "You need to rest, Catherine." The use of her given name startled her enough that she paused in her work. Tyler's blue eyes were intense despite his pain. "Thank you." The simple sincerity in his voice warmed her from within. "You're welcome. Now be quiet and let me finish." By the time she had completed the stitches and bandaged the wound, Tyler was exhausted. With Charlie's help, she got him upstairs to his bedroom where Mrs. Gunderson had already turned down the bed and set out clean nightclothes. "I can manage from here," Tyler insisted, though he was swaying slightly on his feet. Catherine fixed him with a stern look. "Charlie will help you change, then you'll take the laudanum, Mrs. Gunderson prepared and you'll rest, doctor's orders." "You're not a doctor," Tyler pointed out. "I'm the closest thing you've got tonight," she countered. "Charlie, make sure he doesn't do anything foolish." Catherine returned to the study to clean up the medical supplies. Her hands were steady as she worked, but her heart was racing. The sight of Tyler wounded had affected her more deeply than she cared to admit. The thought of how much worse it could have been. She shook her head, forcing away the image of what might have happened. He was alive. He would recover. That was all that mattered. When Charlie came down to report that Tyler was settled, Catherine prepared a tray with broth, bread, and tea. "I'll take this up," she told Mrs. Gunderson. "You should rest. It's been an eventful evening." Tyler was propped up against his pillows when she entered his bedroom, his face drawn with pain but his eyes alert. He had managed to change into a nightshirt with Charlie's help, and the sight of him in such an intimate setting made Catherine suddenly aware of the impropriety of the situation. A young, unmarried woman in her employer's bedroom at night with no chaperone, but Tyler needed care, and there was no one else to provide it. Mrs. Gunderson was too frail and the ranch hands too rough. She would simply have to maintain her professional demeanor. "I've brought some food," she said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "You need to keep up your strength." Tyler's eyes never left her face. "You were magnificent today," he said softly. "Most women would have fainted at the sight of so much blood." "I'm not most women," Catherine replied, pouring him a cup of tea. "No," he agreed. "You're not." He accepted the cup, his fingers brushing hers in the process. "You're extraordinary." The compliment sent warmth flooding through her. "The laudanum is making you delirious, Mr. Thornton." A smile tugged at his lips. "You called me Tyler when you were stitching me up. I liked it." Catherine busied herself with arranging the tray. "You should eat something before the laudanum takes full effect." Tyler obediently took a few spoonfuls of broth, but his gaze remained fixed on her. "Catherine," he said finally, setting aside the spoon, "yes, I could have died today." The blunt statement made her stomach clench. "But you didn't." "No, thanks to you." He reached for her hand and she let him take it. "It made me realize something." Catherine's heart began to pound. "What's that?" "Life's too short for pretense." His blue eyes held her steadily. "I care for you, Catherine, more than an employer should care for his housekeeper." The confession hung in the air between them. Catherine knew she should withdraw her hand, remind him of their respective positions, maintain the professional distance that was expected. Instead, she found herself tightening her grip on his fingers. "The laudanum is definitely affecting you," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Is that your way of saying you don't share my feelings?" Tyler asked, a vulnerability in his expression she had never seen before. Catherine took a deep breath. "It's my way of saying that this conversation should wait until you're recovered." Hope flickered in his eyes. "That's not a no." "It's not a yes either," she countered, gently extracting her hand from his. "Rest now, we'll talk when you're well." Tyler's eyes were already growing heavy with the effects of the pain medication. "Promise?" "I promise," she said softly, gathering the barely touched tray. "Sleep well, Tyler." As she closed his door behind her, Catherine leaned against the wall, her heart racing. Tyler Thornton had feelings for her. The man she had been silently admiring for months returned her affection. It should have been cause for joy. Instead, it filled her with uncertainty. If she acknowledged her feelings, what then? Would she become his mistress? The very thought made her cheeks burn with shame. Her mother had raised her to value her virtue and reputation. But if Tyler was offering marriage, the possibility seemed almost too fantastical to contemplate. He was wealthy, respected, could have his pick of suitable women from good families. Why would he choose a penniless farmer's daughter, and if he did, what would become of her obligation to her mother? Would she be expected to abandon her responsibilities? Or would Tyler understand and support her desire to care for her parent? Too many questions with no clear answers. Catherine straightened her shoulders and headed downstairs. For now, Tyler needed to heal. The rest could wait. The following days saw Tyler confined to bed on Catherine's insistence, though he chafed at the restriction. He was a man accustomed to activity, to being in control, and the enforced idleness made him restless. Catherine found herself serving as both nurse and diplomat, balancing his needs with the running of the ranch. Sheriff Wilson came to take Tyler's statement about the rustlers, and a posse was formed to track down the man identified as Reeves. The town was on edge, with ranch owners organizing extra patrols of their property and families keeping their children close to home. Through it all, Catherine maintained a careful professional distance from Tyler. If he remembered his laudanum-induced confession, he gave no sign of it. Their interactions remained cordial but restrained, focused primarily on his recovery and ranch business. A week after the shooting, Catherine was sorting mail in the study when Tyler appeared in the doorway. He moved carefully, his left arm in a sling, but his color was good and his eyes clear. "Should you be up?" she asked, setting aside the letters. "According to my jailer, yes, but only for short periods." He crossed to the desk, his gaze falling on the neat stacks of correspondence. "You've been busy." "Someone has to keep things running while you recover," Catherine replied. "The ledgers are up to date, the supply orders have been placed, and I've drafted responses to the most pressing correspondence for your review." Tyler took the chair opposite hers. Efficient as always. He studied her face. "You look tired." "I'm fine," she said, though in truth, the past week had been exhausting. Between caring for Tyler, managing the household, and handling much of the ranch's paperwork, she had been working from dawn until well past sunset. "Catherine," Tyler's voice softened, "we need to talk." Her heart skipped a beat. "About the ranch accounts, I've noticed some discrepancies in them about us," he interrupted gently. "About what I said the night I was shot," so he did remember. Catherine clasped her hands tightly in her lap. "You were in pain, under the influence of laudanum. I meant every word," Tyler said quietly. "The medication may have loosened my tongue, but it didn't invent my feelings." Catherine met his gaze, finding only sincerity in his blue eyes. "Tyler," a knock at the study door interrupted her. Charlie stood there, hat in hand, looking apologetic. "Sorry to interrupt, boss, but there's a lady here to see Miss Nichols. Says it's urgent." Catherine frowned. "A lady? Did she give her name?" "Yes, madam. Says she's your mother," Catherine gasped, rising from her chair. "My mother, here." Without waiting for confirmation, she hurried past Charlie toward the front hall, her mind racing. Margaret Nichols stood in the entry hall, looking small and tired in her faded traveling dress. When she saw Catherine, her face crumpled with relief. "Kathy, oh thank God, Mama." Catherine rushed to embrace her mother, noting with alarm how thin she felt beneath her clothing. "What's wrong? Why didn't you write that you were coming?" There was no time, Margaret said, her voice trembling. The bank foreclosed early. They gave me 2 days to vacate. I had nowhere else to go. Catherine tightened her arms around her mother. You're here now, that's all that matters. Tyler appeared in the doorway, his expression concerned. Mrs. Nichols, I'm Tyler Thornton. Welcome to the Double T. Margaret pulled back from Catherine's embrace, her eyes widening as she took in Tyler's imposing presence and the sling supporting his injured arm. Mr. Thornton, I apologize for arriving unannounced. I wouldn't have imposed, but circumstances, no apology necessary, Tyler said warmly. Any relation of Catherine's is welcome here. He turned to Charlie, who hovered nearby. Please bring Mrs. Nichols's belongings to the green room. Mrs. Gunderson, tea in the parlor, if you would. Catherine felt a wave of gratitude for Tyler's immediate acceptance of her mother. Thank you, she said softly as they followed him toward the parlor. He gave her a reassuring smile. Of course. The next hour was spent getting Margaret settled and hearing the full story of the bank's early foreclosure, a story that made Catherine's blood boil with indignation. The bank manager had apparently found a buyer willing to pay cash for the farm, and rather than waiting until the agreed-upon date, had accelerated the eviction process. It's done now, Margaret said wearily, cradling her teacup in her arthritic hands. I managed to pack your father's books and your grandmother's quilt, the furniture. She trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. We'll replace what was lost, Tyler said with quiet authority. Mrs. Nichols, I want you to know that you have a home here for as long as you need one. Margaret looked at him with surprise. That's very kind, Mr. Thornton, but I can't impose. Once I find employment in town, Mama, Catherine interrupted gently, there's no need. The Double T is a large house and there's plenty of room. She glanced at Tyler, who nodded encouragingly. Mr. Thornton has been very generous. Indeed, Margaret said, studying Tyler with the shrewd gaze that had always seen through Catherine's childhood fibs. And may I ask, Mr. Thornton, what exactly is your relationship with my daughter, Mama? Catherine felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Tyler, however, didn't seem discomfited by the direct question. Your daughter is an exceptional woman, Mrs. Nichols. She came here as my housekeeper and has become indispensable to the running of this ranch. But if you're asking about my intentions, he glanced at Catherine, his expression softening. Those are something I'd hoped to discuss with Catherine before speaking to you. However, since you asked directly, I'll answer directly. I care deeply for your daughter, and if she'll have me, I intend to make her my wife. The blunt declaration left Catherine speechless. To hear Tyler speak so openly of marriage, not an affair, not a temporary arrangement, but marriage, was beyond anything she had dared hope. Margaret's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. I see, and does Catherine return these feelings? Mama, please, Catherine finally found her voice. This is hardly the time, on the contrary, her mother said firmly. If this young man is proposing to marry you, I need to know his character and his intentions. She turned back to Tyler. My husband may be gone, Mr. Thornton, but I still take my responsibilities as Catherine's parent seriously. Tyler inclined his head respectfully. As you should, Mrs. Nichols, and I welcome your questions. Catherine is fortunate to have a mother who cares so deeply for her welfare. He stood. But first, you must be exhausted from your journey. Perhaps we could continue this conversation after you've had a chance to rest. Margaret seemed slightly mollified by his deference. Very well, I am rather tired. I'll show you to your room, Catherine said quickly, eager to escape the tension in the parlor. She shot Tyler a look that promised they would speak privately later. As she helped her mother settle into the green room, a lovely chamber across the hall from her own, Catherine tried to process the events of the past hour. Her mother was here, homeless and vulnerable. And Tyler had declared his intention to marry her in the most matter-of-fact way imaginable, as if it were a foregone conclusion rather than a proposal. He seems a decent man, Margaret said as she unpacked her small carpet bag, though I reserve judgment until I know him better. He is decent, Catherine confirmed, hanging her mother's dress in the wardrobe. Kind, fair, hardworking, the hands respect him and the community holds him in high regard. And you, what do you feel for him? Catherine paused, a folded nightgown in her hands. I care for him, Mama. More than I should, given our positions. But he doesn't see you as just his housekeeper, clearly. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, studying her daughter's face. Does he make you happy, Kathy? The simple question brought unexpected tears to Catherine's eyes. Yes, she whispered, he does. Margaret nodded slowly. Then I suppose I should get to know the man who wants to be my son-in-law. A small smile softened her careworn face. Though I would have appreciated a more traditional courtship before a declaration of intent, Catherine laughed, the tension easing from her shoulders. Nothing about this has been traditional, I'm afraid. No, her mother agreed. But then you never were one to follow the expected path, were you? Later that evening, after her mother had retired for the night, Catherine found Tyler in his study. He was seated at his desk, attempting to write letters one-handed, his frustration evident in the crumpled papers beside him. You should be resting, she said from the doorway. He looked up, his expression softening at the sight of her. Probably, but there's ranch business that can't wait. He set down his pen. Your mother is settled? Yes, thank you. Catherine entered the room, closing the door partway behind her, a compromise between propriety and privacy. She's overwhelmed by your generosity. It's nothing, Tyler said dismissively. This house was built for a family. It's too empty with just me rattling around in it. He hesitated, then added, Catherine, about what I said earlier, did you mean it? She interrupted, needing to know. Every word, he replied without hesitation. Catherine took a deep breath. You never actually asked me, you know. A smile tugged at his mouth. Asked you what? To marry you, she said. You told my mother your intentions, but you never asked for my answer. Tyler rose from his chair and crossed to where she stood. You're right, that was presumptuous of me. He took her hand in his touch gentle but sure. Catherine Nichols, I fell in love with you watching you stitch my arm with steady hands and a steadier heart. You're the strongest, most compassionate woman I've ever known, and I would be honored if you would become my wife. The simple, heartfelt words brought tears to Catherine's eyes. Tyler, there's something you should know. I came here for one reason, to earn money for my mother I never expected. She gestured between them. This. I know, he said softly. It's one of the things I admire most about you, your dedication to family. And I want you to know that if you accept me, your mother will always have a home with us. He squeezed her hand. But I need to know, do you care for me, Catherine? Not as your employer, but as a man. Catherine met his gaze directly. I do, more than I thought possible. Relief and joy transformed his features. Then marry me, be my wife, my partner. Help me build something lasting here at the Double T. The offer was everything she could have dreamed of: security for her mother, a future with a man she had grown to love, a place in this wild, beautiful country that had begun to feel like home. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Tyler's smile was brilliant as he drew her into his arms, mindful of his injured shoulder. You've made me the happiest man in the territory, he murmured against her hair. Catherine relaxed into his embrace, feeling for the first time in months, perhaps years, that she was exactly where she belonged. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Silverstone. Some, like Daisy Miller, received it with delight. Others, particularly certain young women who had set their sights on Tyler, were less enthusiastic. But the general response was positive. Tyler Thornton was well respected, and Catherine, though a newcomer, had made a favorable impression at the church social. Margaret Nichols, after her initial wariness, warmed to Tyler as she observed his interactions with Catherine. His genuine affection for her daughter was obvious, as was his respect for Catherine's intelligence and capabilities. Within a week, she had given the match her wholehearted blessing. He looks at you the way your father looked at me, she told Catherine as they walked in the garden one afternoon. Like you're the sunrise after a long, dark night. The wedding was set for mid-October, a compromise between Tyler's desire for an immediate ceremony and Catherine's wish for a proper, if small, celebration. Mrs. Gunderson and Margaret threw themselves into preparations, planning the menu and decorating the house, while Tyler focused on completing the cattle drive before the wedding date. The rustlers remained at large, casting a shadow over the preparations. The man identified as Reeves had disappeared, presumably fleeing the territory once he realized he had been recognized. But several other ranches reported livestock theft, and the tensions in the county continued to rise. 2 weeks before the wedding, Tyler rode out with his men to move the cattle to the railhead. It would be a short drive, just 3 days each way, but Catherine found herself anxious as she watched him prepare. His arm had healed well, but the memory of him returning wounded was still fresh in her mind. "I'll be fine," he assured her, seeing her concern as she helped him pack supplies. "Charlie and the boys know to be extra vigilant, and we're taking additional men this time." "Promise me you'll be careful," she said, handing him an extra box of ammunition for his rifle. Tyler drew her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I promise. Nothing could keep me from returning to you," he smiled down at her. "Besides, I have a wedding to attend." "I hear the bride is the most beautiful woman in the territory." Catherine laughed despite her anxiety. "Is that so? Should I be jealous?" "Terribly," he teased, then grew serious. "I love you, Catherine. I'll come back to you, always." She clung to that promise during the long days of his absence, focusing on wedding preparations to distract herself from worry. Her mother noticed her distraction, but said nothing, merely offering silent support with a squeeze of her hand or a cup of tea appearing at her elbow at just the right moment. On the evening Tyler was due to return, Catherine watched anxiously from the porch as the sun began to set. The cattle drive had been successful according to the telegram they'd received yesterday, but she wouldn't fully relax until Tyler was home safe. "He'll be here," her mother said, joining her on the porch. "That man would move mountains to get back to you." As if summoned by her words, riders appeared on the horizon. Catherine shaded her eyes, her heart leaping as she recognized Tyler's tall figure in the lead. Without thinking, she gathered her skirts and ran down the steps, across the yard toward the approaching riders. Tyler saw her coming and urged his horse forward, outpacing his men. He swung down from the saddle just as Catherine reached him, catching her up in a fierce embrace that lifted her feet from the ground. "You're home," she breathed against his neck, inhaling the scent of dust, horses, and the unique essence that was purely Tyler. "Told you nothing would keep me away," he said, setting her back on her feet but keeping his arms around her. He was trailed dusty and unshaven, his clothes stiff with dried sweat, but to Catherine he had never looked more handsome. "How was the drive?" she asked, reluctantly stepping back as the other riders approached. "Successful," Tyler said, pride evident in his voice. "Got a good price for the cattle and no trouble along the way." He turned to greet his mother, who had joined them in the yard. "Mrs. Nichols, I hope you're well." "Better now that you're back safely," Margaret said with a warm smile. "Catherine has been watching that horizon since dawn." "Has she now?" Tyler grinned at his fiancée. "Worried about me?" Catherine lifted her chin. "Merely concerned about wedding plans. It would be terribly inconvenient if you didn't return in time." Tyler laughed, a rich, deep sound that made Catherine's heart swell with happiness. "Heaven forbid I inconvenience my bride." He turned to his men. "Get these horses settled, then come up to the house. Mrs. Gunderson has prepared a welcome home supper." As the hands dispersed toward the barn, Tyler offered an arm to each of the women. "Shall we, ladies?" "I believe there's a wedding to finalize." The following days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Final fittings for Catherine's wedding dress, a beautiful creation of ivory silk that Daisy's mother had helped alter from a gown in her own trousseau. Last-minute arrangements for the ceremony, which would be held in the double T-Tickets front parlor with Reverend Mitchell officiating. Preparations for the wedding supper, which would include not just the ranch hands and townspeople, but also Tyler's brother James, who was arriving by train the day before the ceremony. Through it all, Catherine marveled at the turn her life had taken. 6 months ago, she had been a farmer's daughter facing destitution. Now she was about to become Mrs. Tyler Thornton, mistress of one of the largest ranches in the territory, with her mother safe and content by her side. Nervous. Her mother asked the night before the wedding as she helped Catherine try on her veil one last time. A little, Catherine admitted, studying her reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back at her seemed somehow both familiar and strange, still Catherine Nichols, but with a confidence and serenity that had been hard-won over the past months. Not about marrying Tyler, but about being a good wife to him. The Double T is more than just a ranch, it's his legacy. I want to be worthy of sharing it with him. Margaret adjusted the veil, her eyes meeting Catherine's in the mirror. Your father would be so proud of you, she said softly. Not because you're marrying a wealthy rancher, but because of the woman you've become: strong, compassionate, resilient. Catherine turned to face her mother. I wish he could be here tomorrow. He will be, Margaret assured her, touching a hand to her heart. In here, just as he's been with us every day since he left us. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and crisp, with just enough autumn chill to turn the leaves of the cottonwoods to gold. Catherine woke early, watching the sunrise from her bedroom window and thinking of all that had brought her to this moment. Her mother helped her dress, fastening the tiny pearl buttons of her gown with fingers that for once seemed free of pain. Something old, she said, placing her own wedding ring on a gold chain around Catherine's neck. Your father would want you to have this today. Something new, Daisy added, arriving to help with Catherine's hair and presenting her with delicate lace gloves. From my mother and me. Something borrowed, Mrs. Gunderson contributed, handing over a handkerchief edged with fine Belgian lace. Carried it at my own wedding 50 years ago. And something blue, Margaret finished, producing a small sapphire brooch to fasten at Catherine's throat. This was your grandmother's. I've been saving it for your wedding day. Surrounded by the women who had become her family in old ways and new, Catherine felt a surge of gratitude. Her journey to the Double T had begun in tears, leaving her mother's embrace for an uncertain future. But that journey had led her here to this day to Tyler. As tradition dictated, Tyler waited downstairs in the parlor, which had been transformed with autumn flowers and greenery. Catherine paused at the top of the staircase, her mother at her side, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. Ready? Her mother asked softly. Catherine took a deep breath and nodded. As they descended the stairs together, the small gathering fell silent. And there was Tyler, waiting at the end of the improvised aisle between chairs, looking more handsome than she had ever seen him in his black suit and crisp white shirt. His brother James stood beside him as best man, but Catherine had eyes only for her groom. The ceremony itself was a blur of emotion. Catherine would later remember the warmth of Tyler's hands as he took hers, the steadiness of his voice as he recited his vows, and the love in his eyes as he slipped his mother's ring onto her finger. But most of all, she would remember the moment when Reverend Mitchell pronounced them husband and wife, and Tyler kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, Reverend Mitchell announced to the assembled guests, I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Tyler Thornton. The reception that followed was joyous, with music and dancing spilling from the house onto the porch and into the yard. Catherine found herself passed from partner to partner. Tyler's brother James, who told amusing stories of their childhood. Sheriff Wilson, who promised Tyler would be on his best behavior or else. And even old Charlie, who confided that he'd never seen the boss so happy. But it was the dance with Tyler that she treasured most, swaying in his arms as the fiddler played a slow, sweet melody. Happy, Mrs. Thornton, he murmured against her hair. Completely, she replied, nestling closer. And you, more than I ever thought possible. He drew back slightly to meet her gaze. Do you remember the day you arrived at the Double T? You were trying so hard to be brave, but I could see you'd been crying. Catherine nodded. I was terrified, leaving my mother, coming to a strange place, working for a man I'd never met. I made myself a promise that day, Tyler said softly. Watching you climb down from that wagon with your eyes all red, trying to hide the fact that you'd been weeping the whole journey, I promised that if you were ever in my care, you'd never have to cry alone. The simple declaration touched Catherine deeply. You've kept that promise, she whispered. Every day since. And I always will, he vowed, sealing the promise with a kiss that left no doubt of his devotion. As the evening drew to a close, the guests departed with well wishes and embraces. Catherine found her mother sitting on the porch, watching the last of the revelry with a contented smile. "Mama," Catherine sat beside her, taking her hand. "Are you all right?" "More than all right," Margaret assured her. "I was just thinking about how life takes unexpected turns. 6 months ago, I was watching you leave, both of us in tears, not knowing what the future held." She squeezed Catherine's hand. "And now look at us. You're married to a good man who adores you. I have a comfortable home, and for the first time in years, I'm not worried about how we'll survive the winter." "I was so afraid," Catherine admitted. "Leaving you, coming here." "I know," her mother said softly. "I was terrified for you. But you were always stronger than you knew. Your father used to say you had the heart of a lion in the body of a sparrow." Catherine laughed. "I don't feel very lion-hearted most days." "That's because courage isn't about feeling brave," Margaret said. "It's about doing what needs to be done despite your fear." She looked out at the mountains, silver in the moonlight. "You've found your place in the world, Kathy, and there's no greater gift a mother could ask for her child." Tyler appeared in the doorway behind them. "There you are," he said, his voice warm with affection. "The last guests are leaving. James is escorting Daisy and her parents back to town." "I should go in," Margaret said, rising from her seat. "It's getting chilly and these old bones feel the cold." She kissed Catherine's cheek, then Tyler's. "Good night, children, be happy." As her mother disappeared into the house, Catherine remained on the porch, gazing out at the land that had become her home. Tyler sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "About journeys," she replied. "About how the hardest roads sometimes lead to the most beautiful destinations." Tyler lifted her hand to his lips. "I'm grateful every day that your road led to me." Catherine leaned her head against his shoulder. "As am I." Together, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge above the mountains. The double T stretched before them, a kingdom they would rule together not as master and servant, but as husband and wife, partners in all things. Catherine thought of the frightened girl who had left her mother's arms 6 months ago, tears streaming down her face as she embarked on an uncertain journey. That girl could never have imagined the happiness that awaited her, the love she would find, the strength she would discover within herself. "Ready to go in, Mrs. Thornton?" Tyler asked, his voice a tender caress. "Yes," Catherine said, rising and offering him her hand. "I'm ready." And together, they walked into the house, closing the door on the past and stepping confidently into their future, a future they would build together, day by day, with love as their foundation and the vast western sky as their only limit. 10 years later, Catherine stood on the porch of the Double T, watching as Tyler taught their 7-year-old son Thomas how to throw a lasso in the yard. Beside them, 5-year-old Margaret attempted to mimic her father's movements with a piece of rope far too large for her small hands, while 3-year-old James toddled after them, determined not to be left out. The sound of their laughter carried on the spring breeze, bringing a smile to Catherine's face. Behind her, the door opened, and her mother emerged with a tray of lemonade. "I thought they might be thirsty," Margaret said, setting the tray on the porch table. At 65, she was still spry, though her hair had turned completely silver and the lines around her eyes had deepened with time. "You spoil them," Catherine said fondly, taking a seat beside her mother. "That's a grandmother's privilege," Margaret replied, watching as Tyler demonstrated the proper technique once more for Thomas. "He's a good father." "The best," Catherine agreed. The decade of their marriage had only deepened her love for Tyler. Together, they had weathered droughts and blizzards, cattle sickness and market downturns, building the Double T into one of the most prosperous ranches in Colorado territory. And through it all, Tyler had remained the steady, compassionate man she had fallen in love with, a devoted husband, a loving father, a respected leader in their community. As if sensing her thoughts, Tyler glanced up, catching her eye across the yard. The love in his gaze was as powerful as it had been on their wedding day, warming her from within. "Mama, watch," Thomas called, successfully twirling his small lasso and casting it over a fence post. "Well done," Catherine applauded. "You're a natural, just like your father." "One day this will all be yours," Tyler told the boy, ruffling his dark hair so like his father's. "You'll be the next generation of Thorntons to run the double T." "Me too," Margaret insisted, tugging at her father's sleeve. "I want to run it too." Tyler laughed, swinging his daughter up into his arms. "Of course you will, little one. You'll be the best cowgirl in Colorado." Catherine exchanged a smile with her mother. Margaret had been right all those years ago. Life did take unexpected turns. The frightened young woman who had left home in tears, clutching a letter offering employment as a housekeeper, could never have imagined the richness of the life that awaited her. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Tyler herded the children toward the porch. "Time to wash up for dinner," he told them, lifting James onto his shoulders while Thomas and Margaret raced ahead. Catherine rose to meet them, her heart full. This was her legacy, not the land or the cattle or the prosperous ranch, though those were blessings too, but the family she and Tyler had built together. The love that had begun with a promise made to a tearful young woman on her first day at the Double T. Tyler stopped before her, his blue eyes warm with the love of a decade shared. "Happy?" he asked, just as he had on their wedding day. "Completely," she replied, lifting her face for his kiss. "And you?" "More than I ever dreamed possible," he said, slipping his free arm around her waist and drawing her close. Together they watched as their children bounded up the porch steps, greeted by their grandmother with hugs and lemonade. The Double T spread around them, a kingdom they had built through hard work, determination, and love, a testament to the journey that had brought a frightened farmer's daughter to the door of a lonely rancher, forever changing both their lives. As they followed their children into the house, Catherine caught Tyler's hand, squeezing it gently in silent gratitude for the life they shared. He returned the pressure, his thumb brushing over her wedding ring, a silent promise renewed daily over the years. A promise kept through drought and plenty, through joy and sorrow, through all the seasons of their lives together. A promise made by a cowboy to a tearful young woman that as long as she was in his care, she would never cry alone.